AI has been around for thousands of years. We just haven't called it AI. The wheel is AI. The gear, the cotton gin, those are all that industrial revolution that we went through. Those were analog artificial intelligences. So now we're getting out of the analog stuff into the digital artificial intelligence. So I think that's happening too. Business is done on a personal level, right? And the old saying is that people will listen to people that they trust, but they'll buy from people that they like. And I find that's true. Being able to build those personal relationships, I don't think you have to scale that at all. There's some things that just have to be done the old-fashioned way. If something's not working, we are nimble enough as an organization to go, yeah, not working anymore. So let's stop doing that. If you're hitting yourself in the head and getting a headache, let's stop doing that.
Hey, Brian, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Growth Marketers Podcast.
Glad to be here.
Most certainly. For our audience who may not be familiar with you, can you share a little bit about who you are and the organization that you work for?
I'm Director of Sales and Marketing for Foam Products Corporation. Foam Products Corporation is a custom foam manufacturing company. We manufacture polyurethane, latex, and synthetic latex foams. Those products go into markets from everywhere from military to medical to sporting goods to flooring. So we do a wide variety of foams, but the real differential between our foams typically that are used in the marketplace and generic commodity type foams are really a specific technical term called compression set resistance. That's a specification that basically says how long a material lasts. And I'll give it an example. So all foams are bubbles, okay? But there are different types of bubbles. Some bubbles are like ping pong balls. When you crush them, they stay crushed. And some bubbles are like tennis balls. When you crush them, they come back up into shape. The materials that we work, the polyurethanes especially that we work, are more like tennis balls. And the reason that that's important is, let's say that you put a product into, let's say you put it into a pair of football shoulder pads. You want that material to last for the life of the shoulder pad, the length of that season. Because what happens is if you use the wrong material, if you used a closed cell polyethylene, that's like a ping pong ball. So every time you step on it, it gets a little less, right? And eventually by the end of the season, you don't have any protection, right? So if you've got a $50 million quarterback playing in the NFL, you don't want to put let's say a poor compression set foam in those shoulder pads or those helmets. And a lot of times our customers will actually tell us what those specifications are. So we may have to run within certain tolerances on thicknesses, compression sets, just a wide variety of things. It depends on what the application is. So for example, if it's going into a military product, they may have Berry compliance, right? So Berry compliance is all the materials that go into that product have to be sourced domestically. So we have the ability to do that type of stuff. If it's more of a commodity type foam or a low price application, we may move over to one of the other foams that we manufacture at one of our other facilities. For example, we are installing right now a production facility to manufacture cross-linked polyethylene foams. That's coming online in another month or so. And those foams are actually kind of geared towards specific applications, and they're very price sensitive.
You've had a lot of technical sales experience. You've had, worked in so many different organizations. And what is so special and unique about a technical sales sort of a role that you fill?
So I'm a sales guy. That's kind of where I cut my teeth in sales. About 20 years ago, I'd say that my approach to sales changed a bit. Okay. And what I did is instead of going into the market like a typical salesperson, we go trying to identify applications and trying to fill those applications with the products that I sell. I decided that I was going to go and create applications for myself. So I would go to a company and say, instead of, hey, what foam are you using? Can I bid on it? I would go to them and say, I've examined your product line. This is the foam that you should be using. This is the foam that I can manufacture for you. I'll show you how we manufacture it. I'll show you how you convert it into a finished product, and I'll help you all along the way. Okay? So I kind of took a turn that way. What happened then is I became a combination of salesperson, product development, purchasing, manufacturing, operations, because in order to drive those products to the end use, you have to be able to say, this is how you're going to do it. So I had to kind of learn along the way of becoming more specialized outside of my general field of sales.
Understood. So basically, what your approach was more so from a solution oriented standpoint, coming to them with a very specific solution that they haven't even been thinking about, and then making recommendation on how they can improve their product or innovate in their industry, essentially.
Exactly. And the way that I kind of describe it to folks is, if you draw a circle on a page, right? If you're inside that circle, you're a commodity. So you're competing with everybody else, and the commodities usually drive down to price and some other little small variables, but it's basically price. What I decided to do is create my own playing field. Okay. So by innovating with products, innovating with materials or processes of manufacturing those materials or converting those materials into finished products, what I did is I became an inch outside of that commodity line, just enough where innovation takes place. If you're too far out, if you're crazy, people aren't going to believe you, and you get your head cut off, and you're just wasting your time. So you got to be just outside that circle in order to capture a new market, a new way of people thinking about things or manufacturing things. It's that space that enables you to gain market share and an actual margin on your product as well, because your product becomes more valuable.
Yeah, I mean, what that approach is very, yeah, very. I mean, it's in some sense it's unique, but it's also much more difficult to do, right? Because what you're describing is you're actually having to do a lot more education of your customers of new way of looking at their products today and saying, hey, there's better way to solve the same problems that you're solving with better technology or better available resources or tools. So you're having to do a little bit of education, and on the other side, you're also having to prove to your leadership, like, hey, it's going to take a longer sales cycle to sell this because I'm approaching it from a different standpoint. I'm not just taking our full catalog of product and just trying to find whoever wants to buy it and then just selling them the SKUs that we have. We may have to uniquely position our product offering to solve a very unique problem that they're not even thinking about solving internally. So you're having to do a lot more education on the customer front, and you also have to get the buy-in from your leadership that this approach is actually better.
Yeah, and the buy-in from the leadership comes way at the front end, right? So there's no reason to hire a guy like me if you're not going to be able to be entrepreneurial, right? On the other side of the table, though, there's also a trust factor that your customer has to gain in order to do that, because in essence, you're asking them to put their jobs on the line to a certain extent. And some folks on that side of the table aren't willing to take that risk, right? The ones that are usually become more successful. The ones that aren't usually kind of stay in that same place, right? So when I present ideas to folks, you have to make sure you're talking to the right people, and you have to make sure that you're framing those discussions that make sense for that person to take that risk with you.
How are you successfully able to? Because most manufacturing companies that you're going to, I'm assuming you're selling mostly to OEMs. They have their set way of doing things, and they don't necessarily like a lot of changes, like you said, right? And then they're just kind of happy and comfortable where they are. How are you able to kind of challenge their thinking and be more like that challenger sales methodology, right? Going to them with ideas, challenge their current status quo, and say, hey, look at this problem in a completely different way. How are you successfully able to do that consistently?
Well, so I guess the best way to do it is, I consider sales, not just a talking profession, right? It engages product development. It engages all your senses, right? And the more senses you can engage, the better off you are. So typically when I sit down with a company, let's say it's a sporting good company or whatever company it is, I will bring in what I call basically a bag of fun. Okay. And in that bag of fun are materials that are sometimes they're just rolled goods, right? Sometimes they're finished goods. And it basically sets up a platform to get their thought process going. So when you can talk about a foam, okay, or hand someone a foam and say, this is what I'm talking about, and then literally manipulate that foam and say, look, if this has to be super resilient, right? So you can take a ball and you can bounce on it, Okay. And then you can take another material that has to be super shock absorbing and you drop that same ball on it and it doesn't bounce. Right. So engaging the creativity of the designers, the purchasing people, the product development people is key in actually pushing that through the process, because there are levels that you get to where you've got to justify yourself, right? And that first meeting, it sets it all, right? And if you can justify yourself on that first meeting, the second meeting becomes a little easier because it then becomes a performance thing, right? So, for example, can you show me that this material does this? Well, yeah, I can,
Mm-hmm.
because I can test that, right? And then you gain credibility as you
Yeah.
go along the
So
line. But it's got to start out with that ability to frame those materials in a way that can make their
mhm.
products
So
better.
obviously, like some of the things that you do is very much custom creating, combinate, different chemical composite to be able to make the different type of foams that they need. So there's a lot of research and development involved, and there's a lot of trial and errors and a lot of going back and forth. So there's a lot of upfront energy, resource, and time spent, right? Like in terms of developing those products. So how do you calculate all of that into your cost of a customer acquisition?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I don't know if you can
Mm-hmm.
truly calculate that, because the more successful you are, the more frequently successful you are, the lower the cost is in essence, because you dollar cost average those over a longer or a larger
Mm-hmm.
portion of the market. But it's not always that. Okay, so for example, it could be as simple as I'll give you an example. I got a call the other day from a contractor was building a building and they wanted to use a specific type of underlayment under a specific type of flooring. Well, they
Mm-hmm.
had that wrong. Okay. They were trying to put an underlayment that's not specified for that application into that application. In a case like that, we're acting as a consultant and saying, look, you have it spec that way, but that's wrong, because if you do that, that
Mm-hmm.
product's going to fail, right? This is the product that you should be putting in that application, and that
Mm-hmm.
installation technique. So it's not always creating something new. Sometimes it's making sure that your customer base doesn't make a mistake, right? Because in a case like this, it was like a 200,000
Mm-hmm.
square foot facility, right? And if they were going to go along that route, they would have bought 200,000 square feet of a product that doesn't work. They probably would have started installing it and then realized at some point, this
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work here. Okay. And now you've got product that you've purchased. You've got a contractor who is already being paid to install something that doesn't work. And now you're throwing off your build time, right? Because now you got to fix that. So it's not just the new product developments, it's products that we already have to make sure that our customers aren't making errors
Yeah.
as they
So
go along the way.
you're investing time upfront to provide the consultation and the guidance that they need, so they're actually able to make the right decision for their project. And what you're describing, I'm also just curious, like how much of your efforts where you're dealing with that resistance, sometimes it might be more of a costly option that you're presenting, and then they often have that resistance because it's going to cost us 20% more or 30% more to go the recommended route, but this is a cheaper route, right? Or there's a cheaper alternative product.
Could be.
So even though you have the best interest of the customer in mind and you probably have the right recommendation, and oftentimes you have the customer that doesn't even want to follow your guidelines. So have you had to deal with that?
Well, that's true. So yes. So I have a saying. My kids make fun of me
Mm-hmm.
because I have a lot of sayings. One of my sayings is I can't
Mm-hmm.
save you from yourself. So if we have consulted with you and say, look, that's not the way that you
Mm-hmm.
should be installing that. Okay. Number one, we won't sell that product to you,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that it's going to fail. Okay, because that's just a nightmare waiting to happen. But if you're going to go down that road, then you can get that product somewhere else. And at that point, there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing else I can do. Some people just have to learn the hard way, and that may be one of
Yeah,
those
100,000
applications.
square foot of flooring is not how you want to make that mistake and figure it out, right? That's a
That's a big six
Exactly.
figure
So you've
mistake, right?
mentioned like obviously majority of your customers are OEMs, and then they're coming to you because as they're in the
Yeah.
life cycle of a product development, they need to use some sort of a foam to make their product usable for their end customers. But you also mentioned scenarios where you have a construction company coming to you because they have a larger application and they need to get your help. So in the OEM world, if you're selling a lot to OEMs, you don't necessarily have a lot of impact on the end customer who might be using that the product. Let's just say, for example, like in a flooring application where a foam is already attached to a floor. So how do you educate the end customer who's making that final purchase of that product about why your product might be superior or any of those things?
It's a very good point. So a lot of that is how you go to market. So the way that we go to market, we really engage in either distributors that sell our product, or we're selling directly to them conceptually wise, right? So a lot of times we are 2 to 3 degrees away from the point of sale, okay? For example, on a flooring product, you can go to one of our regional distributors of our flooring products, right? They then sell to the flooring company that the consumer actually buys from, okay? So in that case, we have to make sure that we're training our distributors properly to frame our products properly in the marketplace, and then they have to train their retailers to do that, okay? Someone like a Coca-Cola who's got, a very large budget, the way that they do that is they train the end user, okay, about their product. So that end user may be you and me, who's going to drink a Diet Coke, right? And the way that they do that is they go through television, they go through promotions, they go through ads, they spend a lot of money educating their consumer on that. We can't really do that. We don't have those budgets, right? So we have to rely on our distributors and the representatives that we work with, in essence, to be force multipliers for us. They have to be salespeople and they have to be educators, okay? And one of the ways that I've just changed recently is I've taken our best technical flooring person. He's got 40 years of experience in flooring, and he's just a valuable asset to the company. And I've kind of pulled him back a bit from his sales duties and primarily started making him a trainer. He's the professor, right? So his job is to go out and make sure that our distributors, and it could be, for example, let's say it's one of our big box retailers. Okay, we go in and we literally go into the store and we train, 15 people on the products that are on their shelves. This product should be used here. This one should be used here. This one should be used here. This product does this. This is why this is better. This is why it's not better. And we lay out the market for them. Okay, so then when you and I walk into that big box retailer and say, I think this floor is cool. What else do I need? They should be able to say, oh, this is what you should use in conjunction with that product. Okay. So training them makes them the person that is the technical expert, so to speak, for the general public, right? Because when you go into that big box store, you expect them to be able to be knowledgeable about the product and advise you properly. So we use that distribution training as opposed to general promotion. Now, it's not that general promotion is bad. It's just that we haven't gone down that leg yet, right? So in our next section of what you would want to call marketing, okay, would be the training of the end user, you and I, on like a flooring product. So so let's make a YouTube video, right? Let's do Instagram shorts, right? Let's do those quick hitters for the people who are following, start following and building that end user platform in addition to our sales multiplication platform. So that's coming. We haven't done that yet. It's easier said than done, because when you engage someone in and you're asking them to watch a YouTube video for X minutes, right? Can't be 15. No one's going to listen to that. But if you can get that education into that 3, 4, under 5 minute segment, people are going to watch that a lot, right? So if I'm going to go buy my flooring, what's this underlayment that I keep hearing about? Google what underlayment should I use, or underlayment, or whatever it happens to be, and our video pops up. That video is short, sweet, educates the general public. Why use it here? Why use it there? So that's the next step in the process. But right now, we're primarily focused on the training of our sales professionals
Yeah.
and
So
marketing.
I mean, I think the flooring is a pretty good example of where maybe they are buying whatever the top, like the hardwood part, and then you have the foam as a separate item, right? Where that's actually very easy to tell the difference between, okay, those are two different manufacturers. What about in scenarios where the OEM actually merges the two together? Are you having to do the education to the end
Yep.
consumer at that time as well?
But actually, that's
Mm-hmm.
happening in the market right now. So in the flooring industry, there is a product called
Mm-hmm.
pad attached. And it used to be that someone would manufacture a laminate floor or a hardwood floor or a luxury vinyl tile, and they wouldn't have a pad attached to it. Now they have a pad that's a
Mm-hmm.
cross-linked polyethylene pad that they attach to that, and it comes to the consumer with the pad attached. We literally are building a production facility to manufacture that cross-linked polyethylene, primarily to supply it directly to those flooring manufacturers who are manufacturing domestically in the US. So now they no longer have to bring a product in from Asia in large rolls, right? And that takes
Mm-hmm.
months to get in, right? And costly. And imagine if we've, got a longshoreman strike,
Mm-hmm.
on the
A
ports
couple
like
weeks
we
ago,
did,
yeah.
a couple of weeks ago, right? Short, but if that extends for a long period of time, you got boats that are backing up.
Mm-hmm.
COVID showed us that, right? So now you have the ability to manufacture that product, which was typically done overseas, reshoring that in, and instead of, you know, 2, 3, maybe 4 months of lead time and planning to get a product in place,
Mm-hmm.
it's a week, right? And you pick it up from our facility right in the heart of the flooring manufacturing capital of the United States, which is that North Georgia
Understood.
area.
So obviously, like a lot of the things that you described in terms of how you're educating the customers, it's a lot of strategic investment have to be made from the business itself, right? Like you talked about taking one of your best salesperson who has 40 plus years of experience in the flooring space to put them as a teacher or a professor, which, marketing term is like a subject matter expert, right? Like a SME who's able to kind of educate,
Sure.
right? That's a big investment because you're also foregoing the revenue that person was driving to be able to educate the market more. So how do you make such a strategic decision? How do you what advice would you give businesses who may or may not be doing that today? How to start thinking about investing into a resource that can actually become their subject matter expert, educating the market.
Well, so a lot of what you do
Mm-hmm.
is trial and error in reality. So back in April of this year, I put in a big our big box partners. I put in a kind
Mm-hmm.
of a training program, and we pushed about 50 stores where we did
Mm-hmm.
trainings for their salespeople. Okay. And then we checked with the retailers to see whether we're getting any bumps in certain areas. And it looked as though we were getting some generated new sales off of that, right? So that kind of anecdotal um, response really kind of leverages the fact that, yeah, we're on the
Mm-hmm.
right track here. And maybe continuing this and doing it in a bigger way will have a multiplied effect,
Mm-hmm.
6 months from now, right? Look, I mean, honestly, you talk to a lot of consultants. I have friends who are consultants. A lot of what they do is they just
Mm-hmm.
change something, right? Go in and change something and monitor it, scale it if it works, and move it on to the next one and the next one and the next one. So, we're kind of doing that a little bit, right? Anecdotally, we look like we're on the right path. If we were a multi-billion-dollar company, I'm sure we'd have 20 people who are analyzing this and drilling down on it and taking all the metadata and the analytics and absolutely doing that. But we're not in
Mm-hmm.
that stratosphere, right? So we've got to go a lot of times with gut. Okay, I think this is working, and it's showing anecdotally that it is. So we're going to keep down this path
Mm-hmm.
until it doesn't, right? Part of one of the things I say is, and it's not unique, it's fail
Mm-hmm.
and fail early, right? So if something's not working, we are nimble enough as an organization to go, yeah, not working anymore. So let's stop doing that,
Yeah.
right? You know, if you're hitting yourself in the head and getting a headache, well, let's stop doing that. right?
Makes sense. Yeah, I think like you were saying, right? You can only help you in terms of educating the customers or educating the seller who's actually having the interaction with the end consumer or the distribution company that actually is making recommendation, right? Like the to whoever the retail companies are. So I mean, like you said, you're a couple of degrees removed from the end customer. So you talked about distribution. Distribution is even more complicated because these guys have probably 5 or 6 or 7 different suppliers that are providing foams, and they're just like, hey, if the retail store calls and say, hey, we need to place an order, they're just going with whatever the brand name that they have in mind, unless they're well educated about the distinction between your product and whatever other competing alternative. So, how have you been able to successfully
Sure.
educate the distributors to know the difference of your product? Obviously, I know you mentioned you have the subject matter expert, but what else can you do to make sure that these guys are actually proactively recommending your product to the end retail stores?
Yeah. So number one is, our distribution base is
Mm-hmm.
pretty fantastic. Okay. When you talk about these folks, and who they are and what their backgrounds are, I mean, these are really people who are embedded in the flooring
Mm-hmm.
industry, for example, 20, 30, 40 years, right? They know what products work. They know what
Mm-hmm.
products don't work, right? And we've been fortunate enough over the last 50 so years of being in place that we've built some
Mm-hmm.
great relationships with those distributors, right? There are a couple of them that, before we would even think about, developing a new product, we'd absolutely have a sit down with them and say, hey, what do you think of this? Right? So they're a huge resource to us, just like we try to be a huge resource to them. So that's kind of one of the advantages of
Mm-hmm.
being who we are, right? We've built up a trust level with that distribution network. Getting into new ones, that's a different bear right there, right? So you've got to be able to say, hey, I've got some gravitas, so to speak, because we've been in this market for so long. They know our products, they
Mm-hmm.
know of our products, but they may not know exactly how our products should be used as opposed to what
Mm-hmm.
they're using right now. So those are the ones that are a little more difficult. And again, that's the one when you say, "Hey, look who's
Mm-hmm.
distributing our product for us," right? You should be on that bandwagon because geographically they are the player in their area, right? And if they're using it, you really should be
Mm-hmm.
considering it as
So
well.
you've talked about it. Obviously, your company's been around over 50 years. You've talked about distributors that have worked in that industry for 20 plus years. Your best sales guy was 40 plus years in the foam space. So these are people that have been around for a long time in terms of product knowledge, industry knowledge, trends,
Mhm.
all of those things. So what have you seen in terms of kind of the marketing strategy and approach? How has that evolved over the last several decades that you've been in the marketing space for industrial products? What is changing in the market if you're selling any sort of an industrial or manufacturing product or services?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of consolidation that's
Mm-hmm.
going on in the market. So I think that, in fact, I read a piece a little earlier this week about the age of company
Mm-hmm.
owners now, right? The baby boomers who own companies, right? As they age and they get to the point where they want to retire, a lot of times they're selling their businesses, right? So there's a consolidation that's going on, for example, in
Mm-hmm.
the flooring industry, right? Where you have guys who are large players, in one geographical area, and all of a sudden they buy a distributor out of another geographical area, and now they've grown their
Mm-hmm.
piece of the pie, so to speak, right? So I think that consolidation is happening, on the products that would be more OEM driven type products, where we work exactly with the guy who's manufacturing the product as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to distribution. Those folks are becoming very lean. Okay, so I think that it may not be AI, but I think AI has probably got a piece of this puzzle in it. And I consider AI. AI has been around for thousands of years. We just
Mm-hmm.
haven't called it AI, right? The wheel is AI, right? The gear, the cotton gin, those are all that industrial revolution that we went through. Those were analog artificial intelligences, right? So now we're getting out of the analog stuff
Mm-hmm.
into the digital artificial intelligence, right? So I think that's happening too. If you look at the way that productivity has increased, over the last 25 years, if you look at, for example, the longshoreman strike, part of that was due to, hey, we want to keep guys working here as opposed to, robotics and sensors and all that kind of stuff taking over the unloading and loading of all these ships, right? So that's a very valid point, right? So I think that AI is going to have an effect, whatever your definition of that is. Mine happens to be that it's
Mm-hmm.
factory automation, right? We're doing more with less because automation is taking control. On the business side, I certainly see a reduction in the workforce in the people who are doing product development. Where there used to be 4 purchasing agents, there may be
Mm-hmm.
3 purchasing agents now, right? Is AI part of that? I don't know. Or are they just asking their people to be more productive, or are they asking their people to do more work with less resources, right? Because business is constantly, struggling with
Mm-hmm.
productivity rates, right? So productivity is up. We want to maintain that productivity up, and I think that's part of the puzzle, And then in that space, how are you able to grab a few minutes from them, right, to even have a conversation about some of these things
Mm-hmm.
that we're talking about?
So let's talk a little bit about sales and marketing. Obviously, there's a lot of changes in the production operation, distribution. All of those areas are being disrupted by some of these automation. Like you said, the industrial automation has happened 40, 50 years ago, right? All of those automation came into
Mhm.
most automotive manufacturers are all using robots and stuff like that for most of the production anyway. But how have you seen,
Correct.
especially in the like you said, we're a relationship based industry, and especially manufacturing and industrial space is very relationship based. People have, at least in the last 4 or 5 decades, right? They've kind of stayed in the same company much longer than an average person today does. That
Mhm.
relationship was there. So how is that dynamic changing? Like you said, ownership is changing because the baby boomers are leaving industries. Their children don't want to actually take over the businesses because they have no interest in a boring company.
Right.
And then also there's just a shift toward a lot of the digital communication, less of interactions like you were talking about, going to a boardroom, bringing your product, just demonstrating examples. That sort of approach is also kind of changing, right, with a lot of virtual meetings and video calls and things of that nature.
Sure.
What is that shift is looking like, and
Mhm.
how can businesses be more proactive in educating their customers through other mediums like the ones that you were describing earlier, using short form content on videos or even other means of reaching your end
Right.
customers?
Yeah. So I look at, and I call it let's just call it the
Mm-hmm.
workforce transfer. Okay. So, my dad worked for the same company
Mm-hmm.
for 42 years, right? Um, and retired with the pension and all that kind of stuff, right? That's not
Mm-hmm.
typical these days. So what I'm finding is, especially the young folks who are coming into the industry, right? They'll come into a company and they'll stay at that company for a couple of years. They'll cut their teeth, build themselves a little bit of a brand recognition on their own, okay? And then they'll move on to another company, okay? For me, that is a double-edged sword, okay? Because number one, especially if it's a young person coming in, I can really have some very interesting conversations with those folks about, what they learned in school, and what's going on in the real world, because they can
Mm-hmm.
teach me something too, right? And as they learn and they grow, I'm building a relationship with them. If they're at XYZ company for, let's say, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right, and then they move on to
Mm-hmm.
ABC company, um, they take that relationship with them, right? So if I'm a valuable asset to them, they're going to call me and say, "Hey, I'm over at ABC now. Let's have a sit down. This is what I'm working on." That's the good side of the sword. The bad side of the sword is when they leave, that
Mm-hmm.
relationship leaves as well. So you have to have built more relationships in that product team than just that one person, right? So when they do leave, you still maintain that relationship, right? So the transfer of product intelligence, the transfer of design intelligence, all that kind of stuff can be a real advantage for someone like me. Um, and the other side is you better get yourself backed up on other people in that product team. Because if they leave, you don't want that intellectual property to go with them,
Yeah.
and then you're dead
Yeah.
in the water.
What are some of the things that you're proactively doing that, I mean, these communications are many times one-to-one, but what have you done to
Yeah.
scale that communication and educating of that buyer on the other end?
In a case like that, I don't
Mm-hmm.
think you need to scale it,
Mm.
to tell you the truth. That personal interaction of, I know you, okay? We've talked in depth about issues
Mm-hmm.
about your product, okay? And maybe we've had a beer or two, right? So I don't think you need to grow that on and
Mm-hmm.
scale it. Business is done on a personal level, right? And the old saying is that people will listen to people that they trust, but they'll buy from
Mm-hmm.
people that they like, right? And I find that's true, right? So being able to build those personal relationships, I don't think you have to scale that at all. There's some things that just have to be
Mm-hmm.
done the old-fashioned way.
Most certainly. A lot of what you described, right? I mean, there's a lot of changes, but some of the old approaches are still very effective, even though it might be done through a virtual environment or something like that, right? You may or may not even have to be face to face, but you can kind of still build those relationships and have the same impact of the old days of just doing road trips and going from one customer to the next customer and bringing them products.
Yeah. And the other part of that is, it doesn't even have to be in your industry, right? Eh, you should be constantly
Mm-hmm.
building your own brand. Okay. So for example, I was on a conference call last week um, with a company that is revamping how they're doing some things, and they were talking about the
Mm-hmm.
promotions and that kind of stuff. Well, I have a friend who makes a specific type of product that's used in promotion, right? I, I'm going to call him and say, hey, you ought to give,
Mm-hmm.
ABC company a call because they could probably use some of your product. And I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
they're a customer of yours, but give them a call, see it, right? So it's not just, I
Mm-hmm.
don't get anything out of that, right? But it's that relationship building of, oh, he's a good dude, right? And,
Mm-hmm.
trust him, right? That's how you build that. That's that, foundational stuff that you don't
Yeah.
have to scale.
And like this is why oftentimes I recommend people. I've heard people just change phone numbers and all kinds of stuff, and then you can't even get a hold of people.
Hmm.
And LinkedIn has certainly helped.
Yeah. Worst thing, the worst thing you
Is
can do right
changing.
now is
Yeah.
change your phone number. So if you go into a company and they want to take your phone number on their product plan, you have to have something signed from them that says they will give you your phone back should you
Yeah.
separate
Because there's
ways.
a lot of relationships that are all attached to that phone number, and that's why I really like
Oh
LinkedIn
God, yeah.
for people who are actively on LinkedIn. Because the first thing I do is just find that person on LinkedIn, connect with them. Because if in the event they leave that organization, I still want to have a way of communicating with that person. It's super important.
Correct.
What
Yep,
what are some
absolutely.
recommendations you might have for manufacturing leaders, especially like you said, like the marketing manufacturing companies that are trying to market in terms of choice of channels, investing resources in the content creation and distribution, and where you are seeing the most impact, whether that's actually organic content or paid promotion or events, wherever you are seeing the biggest impact. What recommendations do you have around that from a marketing perspective?
Yeah, so events in my book are really pieces of time where a community
Mm-hmm.
congregates, and it gives you ability to
Mm-hmm.
chat with folks, right? Typically, if you go to a trade show, you're not like cutting
Mm-hmm.
$1 million deals, right? You're having conversations that advance to $1 million deals, right? So I think trade shows are the right trade show, okay, are a great way to consolidate that ability to see many people in a
Mm-hmm.
short period of time, right? So they can be very cost effective. For me, it's still that old you know sitting down and
Mm-hmm.
communicating with people, right? I'm not deep enough onto the social media side
Mm-hmm.
yet to figure out whether the analytics of that is affecting our business or not, right? I would say over the next 2 years, I'll have a really good understanding of whether the way that we're going to go about doing this is correct. It's either going to be positive, negative, or neutral, right? And if I can get a positive or neutral out of that,
Mm-hmm.
that's a win.
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to the objective, right? Because a lot of times I think people perceive social media as a revenue generating. It has to be a revenue generating channel, but it's not. Often, it should be that
Mm,
approach. It should be more of an awareness channel. How can I use this
yeah,
medium to reach prospective buyers to know that I exist or my brand exists, so that they can actually then come to know about your offerings. And then they may end up just going to the website or then Google searching a little bit more about your product, read the
correct.
blog and whatever else, right? Because I think whenever people categorize social channels as one of the means to generate leads, and then when it doesn't produce any immediate leads, they write it off as an ineffective medium and then say, don't waste any time or energy on it. But rather, if they use that as a distribution channel of getting to people who are your prospective buyers, educating them, getting them to know that you exist or your product offering exists, then that can lead to hopefully a future conversation in the sales front.
I agree with that. And I'll put a caveat on it though. So, number one is, my degree in college
Mm-hmm.
years and years ago was, in essence, a communication
Mm-hmm.
public relations degree. Okay, so what you learn there is in communicating with people. Number one,
Mm-hmm.
you have to know your audience. Okay, and number two, you have to present information to your audience in a way that
Mm-hmm.
your audience will accept it. Okay, that's social media in a nutshell, right? So if I'm marketing flooring to a 25-year-old, it may be different than how I market flooring to a 55-year-old. Okay, for a variety of reasons. Number one is they may be in different price ranges of their house, right? They may be in different earnings categories in their careers, right? Typically, a 55-year-old would be earning
Mm-hmm.
more than a 25-year-old. So, being able to structure that and then take advantage of the analytics that go into
Mm-hmm.
how you present that and um, the logarithms that are created by the social media companies and
Mm-hmm.
how they do that. There's folks that are deep into that understand that way better than I do, right? So, how often do you make a presentation on an
Mm-hmm.
X platform, or how often do you plug into Instagram, right? All those the algorithms that those companies use all feed on those metrics. So you may be doing everything right, but
Mm-hmm.
presenting it wrong, and you're not getting
Yeah.
your message out, right? The other part of that I'm pushing back on you a little bit is there are revenue channels, little
Mm-hmm.
revenue channels, off of those uh, media platforms that will allow you to
Yeah.
make sales. Okay, so again, go back to like a Coca-Cola. The reason that Coca-Cola advertises, on the Super Bowl is not
Mm-hmm.
to sell product. It's to keep brand awareness where it needs to be, right? Because that brand awareness is
Mm-hmm.
valuable. And I think that when we go through this social media platform, we have to create value um, in
Mm-hmm.
one way or another, and brand perception, brand awareness is a high value
Yeah, most certainly. I
prospect.
think on the B2C side, for sure, there's direct to consumer approach where you can actually use social media to, especially if it's like an impulsive purchase, right? Like you're just buying it on the moment is it's not a considered purchase, right? Whereas on the B2B side,
Sure,
you can always expect conversion right off of a social media content, right? You have to think of
correct.
it as a totally an awareness channel. And I agree 100%. I've made a lot of purchases just by randomly consuming stuff. Even yesterday, I almost was tempted to buy a shoes just because it offered a shoe where you can customize with your initial on a shoe. And it was just came in my feed.
Yeah,
And I'm like, oh, that's ST is just my initial. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Maybe I should consider buying it.
sure.
But it's an awareness
Smart.
channel where they use to get in front of me to make me want to probably make a purchase. But on the B2B side, I think the leadership need to recognize that channel for what it is. It's primarily an awareness channel. Of course, you can probably drive some sort of a conversion, whether that's like inquiring to get your catalog or get a resource or a template or
Yeah,
even sample request. you can probably have that be sent out as a way, right? But you're not expecting them to make a $1,500 to $2,000 purchase right off of that, right? As an immediate.
Yeah, exactly. And look, when you look at the metrics of, hits and how long people have stayed on your website and how did
Correct.
they get there and all that kind of stuff. I think it's all very important. But you can't also, let's not confuse motion with action, right? So you can run in the same spot very quickly and not get anywhere, right? Or I can take two steps and I've advanced
That's true.
myself with an action, right? So I think when you do these things, you have to be fully aware of how you're doing them and what
Yeah.
you're trying to get
Yeah.
done,
The other
right?
other thing I thought about for your organization is even user generated content. So if you have actual contractors in the field doing floor installations or any sort of application where your foam is being
Mhm.
used, and then actually them explaining why, how you apply it, why this sort of a foam is required, and all of those things. And if they're creating content and then you repurpose that in your own social content, just sharing what other people are already using, right, doing in the field, that actually validates your product, right, and also gets credibility because you have pros on the field doing the work using your product, right, as opposed to you saying, hey, this is how you use it or this is how you do it. I think that's also a great way a
Yeah.
manufacturer can actually start creating a lot of fresh content because it's authentic content other users are using and creating as opposed to you.
People remember
Mm-hmm.
negatives more
Mm-hmm.
than they remember positives, right? I mean, think of all the
Yeah.
political ads that we have going right now. Having a segment of, your
Mm-hmm.
contractor
Oh
nightmare,
yeah.
right? That might not be a
Sure.
bad idea, right? So get a contractor to come on and say, what the
Mm-hmm.
hell happened there, right? And then other contractors are going to learn from that. Plus, some
Yeah.
of them could be
Yeah. And
funny.
it's mistakes to avoid. I think I've seen also where when you read articles, you can look at the titles and it's always the one like top 10 mistakes to avoid. Are people actually more likely to read that
Yeah.
than, top
Yes.
best way to do something?
Yeah.
Like, you know, you just assume you know
Right.
how to do it the best way, but you kind of want to avoid mistakes,
Yep.
right? Yeah, there's a lot of good
Right.
insights and nuggets here. Is there anything else you would advise in terms of from a marketing perspective, from your years of experience, to a manufacturing company leader who's trying to reach their end customers?
Well, I think really what it comes down to is there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of probing that you have to do. Right. You got to go out
Mm-hmm.
and do your recon. Right. You got to go out and engage. I think if you're not engaging,
Mm-hmm.
you're missing the ball. Right. I think there's too many companies out there who
Mm-hmm.
think they know it all right now, and you know, hopefully they're
Yeah.
my
And
competitors.
also, what about like a willingness to change? Because obviously, you've demonstrated over the years, you've kind of adapted to the changes in the industry, in the way how you do it. What advice
Sure.
would you give to an entrepreneurial leader who's trying to run a manufacturing company?
Well, change for change
Mm-hmm.
sake, no. Right. So if something's working, keep working it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean it can't be better. Okay. But really, what we try to do is, and one of my, you know, basic thesis is, obsolete yourself. Don't let your
Mm-hmm.
competitor obsolete you. So you have to continue to kind of push, this is what we have. This is what we should be looking at because someone may come along and
Mm-hmm.
jump our shark, right? And we want to jump our own shark.
Yeah, and I've seen the resistance when you see the competitors aren't doing something like, oh, they're not putting on social media, so why should we? Oh, they're not creating blogs, so why should we? What would you tell to that business leader who's not doing because the competitors aren't actively trying some of those things?
Well, so
Mm-hmm.
lead, right?
Don't be a follower. Take the lead. Makes sense. Great advice, Brian. Appreciate the conversation. Thank you so much for sharing some of your lessons learned and advice for other marketers in the industrial and manufacturing sector.
Hey, Samuel, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Enjoyed the conversation.
If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.